Launa, look, if I get the glitter ones, I'll be the fastest girl in second grade. Right? I laughed, adjusting my purse as we stepped into the cool air of the mall. Yes, baby. You'll be a blur. I promise. As soon as we find your size. We're hitting the food court for those cinnamon bites you love. I had been saving for this Saturday for 3 weeks. Working double shifts as a medical assistant isn't easy, but seeing my daughter's face light up at the display window made every extra hour worth it. For the first time in a year, the air didn't feel heavy. We were just two people in a sea of shoppers, anonymous and safe. Or so I thought. We were passing the fountain when the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. My heart didn't just skip a beat. It stopped. There, standing by the escalator with a smirk that had haunted my nightmares, was Donald. The court order in my bag was supposed to be a wall, a 500-foot barrier he wasn't allowed to cross. But as he stepped out of the crowd, eyes locked on mine with a terrifying hunger, I realized that to a man like Donald, a judge's signature was just a piece of paper. And today, in the middle of a crowded mall, he decided that paper didn't matter anymore. "Mommy, you're squeezing my hand too hard," my daughter whispered, her voice trembling as she followed my gaze. I tried to pivot, to blend back into the crowd toward the department store exit, but Donald was faster. He moved with a predatory grace, cutting off our path near the edge of the food court. "Running away again, Launa?" His voice boomed, intentionally loud to draw the eyes of nearby diners. "I told you, you don't go anywhere without my say-so." "Donald, please," I hissed, my voice cracking. "There's a restraining order. Just let us go." He laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that drew a circle of onlookers. Instead of helping, I saw the flashes of smartphone cameras rising. They weren't seeing a woman in danger. They were seeing content. Donald saw them too, and it fueled him. He lunged forward, his muscular hand clamping around my throat with a bruising force that cut off my plea. The world began to blur as he shoved me back against a glass railing. "You think you're better than me because of some fancy dress?" he roared, his other hand reaching for the neckline of my off-shoulder navy dress, threatening to tear it away and leave me exposed to the lenses of 100 strangers. I clawed at his wrist, my boots scuffing uselessly against the tile, while my daughter's screams echoed against the vaulted ceiling. I looked at the crowd, pleading with my eyes for someone to step in, but all I saw was a wall of glowing screens. I was drowning in broad daylight, and the world was just hitting record. The air in the food court grew thick with the smell of fried oil and the metallic tang of my own terror. Donald's fingers dug deeper into my windpipe, his knuckles white, his face a mask of twisted triumph. I could see the sweat on his forehead and the frantic, wide-eyed reflection of myself in his pupils. I was a medical assistant. I knew exactly how long it took for the brain to start starving for oxygen, and as the edges of my vision began to flicker with dark spots, I realized I was running out of seconds. "Look at you," Donald sneered, his voice vibrating against my skin. "Thinking you're some queen in this navy dress. Let's see how royal you look when I rip it off you right here." He yanked at the delicate fabric of my shoulder, the sound of a seam popping like a gunshot in my ear. I screamed, but it was a thin, strangled thing. Beside us, my daughter had collapsed to her knees, her small hands over her ears as she sobbed into the tile. But the most haunting sound wasn't her crying. It was the silence of the people standing 5 feet away. I turned my head, gasping for a sliver of air, and saw a wall of black rectangles. Dozens of people had their phones held high, their faces obscured by their screens as they adjusted their focus to get a better angle of my humiliation. No one shouted for him to stop. No one stepped forward. They were all waiting for the viral moment to happen. Donald's grip shifted, his thumb pressing hard against my carotid artery. The world started to tilt. My knees buckled, and for a terrifying moment, I felt the cold glass of the railing give way behind me. I was falling not just physically, but into that old dark hole of helplessness I had fought so hard to climb out of. I closed my eyes, praying that my daughter wouldn't remember the sight of my body hitting the floor, or the sound of the crowd's collective gasp as they uploaded the footage of my end. Just as the darkness began to pull me under, The crushing weight on my throat suddenly vanished. There was no shout, no warning. Just the sound of a heavy, singular thud and the sudden rush of cool oxygen hitting my lungs. I slumped to the floor, coughing violently, my hands instinctively flying to my bruised neck. Through the haze of my tears, I looked up and saw a pair of polished black Oxfords standing where Donald had just been. The man in the sharp suit didn't look like a hero. He looked like a storm that had finally made landfall. He was calm, his expression almost bored, but as he slowly began to roll up his sleeve to reveal the dark, intricate ink of a dragon coiling down his forearm, the atmosphere of the entire mall shifted. The cameras didn't lower, but the air of entertainment died instantly, replaced by a cold, suffocating fear that even Donald couldn't ignore. Donald stumbled back, his hands flying to his face, a crimson trail already leaking through his fingers. The crowd's collective breath hitched. The smartphones didn't drop, but the frantic clicking of shutters slowed as a heavy, predatory silence smothered the food court. Choi Hyun-woo didn't look at the cameras. He didn't even look at me yet. He stood with the poise of a statue, his silhouette sharp and lethal against the mall's neon glow. With a terrifyingly slow deliberation, he reached for his right cufflink. He unfastened it, then the left, placing them into his pocket before beginning to roll up his sleeves. As the fabric climbed, the ink was revealed. A dark, serpentine dragon that seemed to coil around his muscle, its tail disappearing beneath his watch. You hit me?" Donald roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of shock and wounded ego. He tried to lunge forward, his face contorted in a mask of rage, but Hyun-woo didn't flinch. He simply pivoted on one heel, his movement a blur of efficiency. Before Donald could even raise a fist, Hyun-woo's hand shot out, catching Donald by the same throat he had just used to choke me. The irony wasn't lost on the crowd. Donald's feet dangled inches off the floor, his face turning a shade of purple that mirrored my own bruises. "You seem to enjoy making women feel small," Hyun-woo said, his voice a low, melodic baritone that carried a weight far heavier than a shout. "But today, you are the only small thing in this room." Donald thrashed, his heels drumming uselessly against the air, but Hyun-woo's grip was like iron. He leaned in closer, whispering something into Donald's ear that made my ex-husband's eyes go wide with a sudden, bone-deep terror. Whatever was said stripped Donald of his bravado instantly. With a flick of his wrist, Hyun-woo tossed him aside like a piece of refuse. Donald crashed into a trash bin, sprawling amidst the remnants of strangers' lunches. Finally, the man in the suit turned to me. The coldness in his eyes evaporated, replaced by a deep, scanning concern. He knelt on the tile, ignoring the expensive fabric of his trousers, and reached out. I flinched, a reflex I couldn't control, but his hand stopped an inch from mine, waiting. "It's over," he said, his gaze shifting to my daughter, who was still trembling on the floor. He looked back at me, his voice softening. "My name is Choi Hyun-woo, and from this moment on, no one, not him and not these vultures with their phones, will ever touch you again." For the first time in my life, looking into the eyes of a stranger with a dragon on his arm, I actually believed it. The following days felt like a fever dream, a blur of ice packs for my throat and the soft, repetitive sound of my daughter's breathing as she slept fitfully beside me. I expected the police to call with 100 questions about the man in the suit, but instead, there was only silence, a heavy, curated silence. Donald had been taken away in an ambulance, and strangely, no charges had been filed against the stranger who had nearly crushed his windpipe. It was as if the entire incident at the mall had been scrubbed from the public record, despite the dozens of phones that had been recording. Curiosity eventually overrode my fear. I sat at my kitchen table, the glow of my laptop the only light in the room, and typed the name into the search bar. Choi Hyun-woo. At first, the results were polished and professional. He was listed as the CEO of a global logistics firm with offices in Seoul and New York. There were photos of him at charity galas, looking every bit the refined businessman. But as I scrolled deeper into the archived forums and translated news snippets from overseas, a different image began to emerge. The word Jiamnyong, golden dragon, appeared frequently, whispered in threads about shadow management and untraceable influence. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a man people didn't speak about out loud. Rumors swirled of a lineage connected to the oldest factions of the Korean underworld, a mafia ghost who moved through the upper echelons of society with a lethal, invisible power. They said he was the one who settled the debts the law couldn't reach. They said he was a man of absolute loyalty, but that crossing him was a death sentence. A knock at my door made me nearly jump out of my skin. I closed the laptop, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I looked through the peephole, I didn't see a monster. I saw a man in a charcoal suit holding a small, white bakery box. I opened the door just a crack, the chain still engaged. "How did you find where I live?" Hyun-woo didn't look offended by the question. He looked at me with those same scanning, protective eyes. "I make it my business to know where the things I value are located, Launa. And I brought the cinnamon bites I heard you mention at the mall. You never got to finish your shopping." The realization hit me like a physical weight. He wasn't just a bystander who had stepped in. He was a force of nature that had decided to anchor itself in my life. I looked at the dragon tattoo peeking from beneath his cuff and felt a strange, terrifying shift in my soul. I was no longer afraid of Donald. I was afraid of the sheer scale of the shadow that was now standing on my doorstep, offering me a pastry while the world trembled at his name. Accepting that bakery box felt like signing a treaty I didn't fully understand. Within 48 hours, the world outside my window changed. It started with the black sedan, a silent, gleaming sentinel parked at the curb of my modest apartment complex. Then came the men. They didn't wear uniforms. They wore dark, tailored suits and earpieces so discreet they were almost invisible. They didn't loiter or smoke. They simply existed in the spaces where I used to feel most vulnerable. "They are here for your peace of mind, Launa," Hyun-woo told me over the phone, his voice as steady as a heartbeat. "You have spent too long looking behind you. From now on, I want you to look forward." It wasn't just the men. A crew arrived on Tuesday to replace my front door with a reinforced steel core and a biometric lock that required my thumbprint. They installed high-definition cameras that covered every blind spot in the hallway and the parking lot. My cramped, two-bedroom apartment, once a place where I jumped at every creak of the floorboards, was being transformed into a high-tech fortress. At first, the intrusion stifled me. I felt like a bird in a gilded cage, watched and catalogued. But then I noticed the shift in the neighborhood. The group of men who used to catcall me from the corner vanished the moment one of Hyun-woo's associates leaned out of the sedan and whispered a single sentence. The landlord, who had ignored my requests to fix the exterior lighting for months, suddenly arrived with a team of electricians, his hands shaking as he avoided eye contact with the man standing guard at my door. The iron shield wasn't just physical. It was psychological. For the first time in years, I didn't check the locks 3 times before bed. I didn't plan my route to the grocery store based on the best-lit streets. When I walked my daughter to the bus stop, the man in the charcoal suit followed at a respectful distance, a silent promise that the monsters of my past were no longer invited to my future. I watched from my balcony as the sun set, the black sedan's headlights flickering on like the eyes of a watchful beast. I realized then that Hyun-woo wasn't just protecting me from Donald. He was erasing the very environment that allowed men like Donald to thrive. He was giving me the one thing money couldn't buy and a restraining order couldn't enforce, the absolute, terrifyingly beautiful certainty of being untouchable. I was safe, but as I looked at the encrypted monitor he'd placed on my kitchen counter, I couldn't help but wonder what the cost of such a fortress would eventually be. Rain drummed a rhythmic, somber beat against the reinforced glass of my balcony as Hyun-woo sat across from me. He had come alone this time, without the usual retinue of silent men in dark suits. In the dim light of my living room, he looked less like a shadow king and more like a man carrying the weight of 1,000 years. He didn't reach for the tea I'd poured. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on the rain. "You wonder why, Launa?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it commanded the entire room. You wonder why a man like me would step into a mall brawl for a stranger. I didn't blink. I've spent every night wondering. Men in your position don't do anything without a reason. I don't have money, and I don't have influence. So why? Hyunwoo slowly unbuttoned his blazer, leaning forward. Power is often used to take, but its true purpose is to preserve. Years ago, before the Golden Dragon was a name people feared, I was just a man with a wife and a daughter. They were my sun and my moon. He paused, a flicker of raw, unshielded pain crossing his features. I was young, arrogant. I thought my name alone was enough to protect them. I didn't see the wolf at the door until it was too late. He described a day much like mine. A public place, a sudden moment of violence, and a crowd that did nothing but watch. But unlike my story, there had been no one to roll up their sleeves. No one to stop the hands that took his world away. When I saw Donald's hand on your throat, he continued, his gaze finally meeting mine, I didn't see a stranger. I saw the moment I failed my own family. I saw the silence of that crowd and the cowardice of a man who thinks strength is found in hurting what is smaller than him. He reached out, and this time I didn't flinch. He traced the fading yellow bruise on my neck with a feather-light touch. I couldn't save them, Launa, but I can save you. My word is not just a promise to protect you. It is my penance. I chose you because, in your eyes, I saw a light that shouldn't be extinguished by the likes of Donald Won. The air in the room felt different then. The iron shield wasn't just about security cameras and steel doors anymore. It was built on the ashes of his past. For the first time, I realized that we were two broken people trying to build a fortress out of our scars. He wasn't just my protector. He was a man seeking a second chance at a life he thought he'd lost forever. And as he sat there in the quiet of my new sanctuary, I realized that the Mafia boss was, at his core, a father who had finally found a way to come home. The sense of peace was fragile, a thin glass barrier that shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in the library, the glow of my laptop highlighting the medical terminology I was fighting to memorize, when my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. My stomach dropped before I even swiped the screen. It was a photo, granular, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. It was a shot of me through the library window, my head down, completely unaware of the lens tracking me. The next message followed instantly. Safe behind your glass walls, Launa? I see you. I see the little one at the bus stop, too. Suits can't be everywhere at once. I'm going to take back what's mine. The air left my lungs. My hands shook so violently I nearly knocked my coffee over. Donald was out on bail, or perhaps he had never been processed at all. His malice was a weed that refused to be pulled. I didn't call the police. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that they wouldn't arrive in time to stop a ghost. Instead, I called the only man who moved faster than the law. Hyunwoo arrived at the library in less than 10 minutes. He didn't come with a spectacle. He simply appeared at my table, his presence a sudden, grounding weight. He didn't ask for an explanation. He took the phone from my trembling hand, his eyes scanning the photos with a clinical, terrifying focus. I watched his jaw set, a single muscle feathering in his cheek. He thinks he is playing a game of shadows, Hyunwoo said, his voice dropping to a register that made the hair on my arms stand up. He thinks he can use your fear as a weapon. He handed the phone to one of his associates, who had materialized behind him. Find the origin of the signal. Trace the vehicle in the reflection of the glass. I want him located by sunset. Hyunwoo turned back to me, his expression softening just enough to keep me from spiraling. Go home, Launa. Take the back entrance with Minho. Do not look at your phone again today. What are you going to do? I whispered, gripped by a sudden fear of the monster I was about to unleash. Hyunwoo reached out, his thumb brushing my knuckles. It was the dark night surfacing, the man who lived in the places where sunlight didn't reach. I am going to remind Donald that there are some shadows that swallow others whole. He made the mistake of filming my world. Now, I am going to show him how it feels to be the one who is watched. As I was ushered away, I saw Hyunwoo standing in the center of the library, perfectly still, his silhouette dark and immovable. For the first time, I felt a flicker of pity for Donald. He had poked a sleeping dragon, and the fire was coming for him. The courtroom was a tomb of polished wood and cold marble, the air smelling of old paper and suppressed anxiety. I sat at the witness table, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles turned the color of bone. Across the aisle, Donald sat with a cocky tilt to his head, his lawyer whispering in his ear. He looked polished, wearing a suit that was likely a lie bought on credit, and every time the judge looked away, he would cut his eyes toward me with a smirk that promised this was only a temporary setback. He still believed he was the strongest man in the room. That belief lasted exactly until the heavy double doors at the back of the court swung open. Choi Hyun-woo didn't enter with a flourish. He entered with a gravitational pull. He didn't sit in the gallery with the other spectators. He walked straight to the front, flanked by two men whose presence made the court officers look like amateurs. The room fell into a sudden, suffocating silence. Even the judge paused, sensing a shift in the hierarchy of power that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with the man now standing behind me. When it was time for my victim impact statement, my voice wavered at first. I looked at Donald, and for a second, the old fear, the maul, the hand on my throat, the flickering library lights, threatened to drown me. But then I felt a hand settle firmly on my shoulder. It was warm, steady, and immovable. "Go on, Launa," Hyun-woo whispered. I found my voice. I spoke of the bruises, the restraining orders ignored, and the terror of being hunted. As I spoke, Donald's smirk began to sour. He looked at Hyun-woo, then at the two men standing at the exits, and finally at the sleek, encrypted tablet one of Hyun-woo's associates handed to the prosecutor. It wasn't just my testimony on that screen. It was a digital map of Donald's every move, every threatening text sent from burner phones, and evidence of the shady associates he tried to hire to bypass my security. The realization hit Donald like a physical blow. He wasn't just fighting a woman he thought he owned. He was fighting an empire that saw through every shadow he tried to hide in. He looked at Hyun-woo, pleading for some sign of mercy, but he found only the cold, unyielding eyes of the dragon. For the first time, I saw Donald look truly small. He realized that the man behind me didn't just have the truth. He had the power to make the world end for anyone who touched what belonged to him. When the judge handed down the maximum sentence without the possibility of bail, Donald didn't scream or fight. He simply sat there, trembling, finally understanding that the predator had become the prey. The heavy thud of the courtroom doors closing behind us felt like the final chord of a long, discordant song. Donald was gone, destined for a cell where his shadow couldn't reach me. Yet as I stood on the courthouse steps, the sunlight felt strangely thin. I was free, but I was still the woman who lived behind a steel door, a medical assistant with a mountain of debt and a heart that didn't know how to beat without a rhythm of fear. Hyun-woo didn't lead me back to the black sedan. Instead, he drove me himself, the city blurring into a streak of gray and gold as we climbed toward the heights of the city. We pulled up to a townhouse that looked like it had been carved from moonlight. All sleek limestone, floor-to-ceiling glass, and a garden that breathed peace into the air. "This is the new path, Launa," he said, handing me a heavy silver key. "It is registered in your name. There are no cameras in the bedrooms, no guards inside the walls. Here you are not a witness or a victim. You are just a mother." I walked through the foyer, my heels clicking on the marble, and found a mahogany desk in the study. On top of it lay a single cream-colored envelope. Inside wasn't a bill, but a receipt. A full tuition payment for the nursing degree I had abandoned when Donald first broke my spirit. The breath caught in my throat. It was too much. The house, the school, the safety, it felt like a beautiful trap. "Why are you doing this, Hyun-woo? I can't pay you back. I don't have anything that a man like you could possibly want." He stepped into the room, the dragon on his arm hidden beneath the sleeve of his bespoke suit, but the power in his gaze was unmistakable. He didn't move to close the distance. He gave me the space I had been denied for years. "I am not a man who makes investments in property, Launa. I make investments in people," he said, his voice a low, steady hum. I have provided the cage to keep the world out, but the door is unlocked. You can take this life, finish your degree, and never see me again. Or you can choose to let me stay. Not as your shield, but as the man who walks beside you. He looked at me with a vulnerability that mirrored the scars he had revealed in the rain. I am asking you to choose me, not because you are afraid, but because you are finally free enough to decide who gets to see the woman behind the navy dress. I looked at the key in my hand and then at the man who had burned down my old world to build me a palace. For the first time, I wasn't choosing survival. I was choosing a future. The townhouse became more than a house. It became a sanctuary where the silence no longer felt like a threat. Weeks turned into months, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waking up in a cold sweat checking the locks. I spent my days immersed in my nursing textbooks, the weight of the tuition receipt still a warm reminder of a debt that Hyunwoo never intended to collect. One evening, as the city lights began to twinkle like fallen stars outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Hyunwoo asked me to join him in the garden. My daughter was already asleep, tucked away in a room filled with the books and toys she had always dreamed of. We walked to the edge of the terrace, where the scent of jasmine hung heavy in the air. He stopped near a stone bench and turned to me, the moonlight catching the sharp lines of his face. He looked at me not as a project or a victim, but as the woman who had finally found her breath. "I watched you today," he said softly. "You were laughing with your daughter. You didn't look over your shoulder once." I forgot how that felt, I admitted, moving closer to him. To just be. Hyunwoo reached into the inner pocket of his coat and produced a small velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't need the theatrics of a desperate man. He stood with the quiet authority of a king offering a crown. When he opened it, a simple, elegant band set with a single, flawless diamond caught the light. "I am not asking you for a wedding today," he said, his voice a low, resonant promise. "You are still healing, still discovering who you are without the shadow of a monster. But I want you to wear this. It is a promise ring, a sign to you and a warning to the rest of the world. It means you are under the protection of the golden dragon. It means you are claimed." He took my hand, his fingers steady and warm. "When you are ready, I will ask for your life. But until then, let this be the shield you wear when my men are out of sight." As he slid the ring onto my finger, a strange, profound peace settled over me. It was the weight of 1,000 soldiers, the strength of a shadow empire, and the tenderness of a man who had finally found something worth guarding with his soul. I looked at the ring, then up into the eyes of the man who had done the unbelievable. I had been grabbed by the throat by a man who wanted to destroy me, but I had been claimed by a man who chose to rebuild my entire world. The fear was gone, replaced by the absolute certainty that as long as I wore this ring, I would never have to fight a battle alone again. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a queen in a kingdom of his making.